Okay, guys, so welcome to round 2. This is Lee with Untapped Potential. Our opening hand is once again completely unkeepable, as we have only drawn one land, so we're going to have to throw this one back. Our opponent gets to decide first if they are going to keep or mulligan, and they have just mulliganed, so will we. Okay, now this one has 3, it has a 3-drop, it's not great, but it's better, so let's roll with it. So once again, our opponent is playing white, which means we might be up against another very fast beatdown deck, and we draw another expensive card in our opening hand. We go ahead and pass back to our opponent, and let's see what they've got. Our opponent has ended their turn with only a single land out and has still not done anything, suggesting that they are every bit as stuck as we were last time. We go ahead and run out our shadows here on turn 2, since we can't play any creatures. The next turn we can play an Eyeblight Assassin, which will be even better if he plays a 2-power, 1-toughness creature, and if he doesn't, we might just read the bones. So we draw another island here, and we are just going to go ahead and read the bones. So the top cards of our library are an island and a Clash of Wills. I don't think I want the Clash of Wills. I'm going to go ahead and take the island. And now, so we're up to 5 lands, although we don't have the double black we need for Guiltleaf Winnower, but on the other hand, we can play Meteorite on turn 5, which will get us there. So we're going to go ahead and pass the turn. We can also, on turn 5, play our Possessed Scab to get our Read the Bones back to keep digging, and won't that be a treat? So our opponent is stuck on 2 lands. Maybe they've drawn a third one this turn, because I hate it for when opponents don't get to play Magic. It's what happened to us in Game 1, and sure, it helps our win rate, but it's just not fun for anybody. We are going to go ahead, though, and play out our Eyeblight Assassin, just in order to start getting some damage out, get some creatures on the board. Our opponent draws and ends their turn again. I mean, they have to discard a card. Ugh, I'm sorry, buddy. This is no good for you. He is the second white-red deck we played, though, meaning that he probably doesn't have as good a pool as the guy we played in Game 1. They were probably competing for the same stuff. And seeing as how our Round 1 opponent had some really premium cards in those colors, I have a feeling they were competing against each other too much, so our opponent this round just probably didn't get as much good stuff. And it also doesn't help that he's literally not drawing any lands. We're waiting for him to discard during his cleanup stage here before we can begin our own turn. For those of you not terribly familiar with the rules of Magic, if you end your turn with more than 7 cards in your hand, you have to discard down to 7. And now we have some decisions to make. We could play our Possessed Scab this turn, getting back Read the Bones. We could go ahead and play Jace this turn. Or we can play Meteorite to get our second black mana out for Guiltleaf Winnower. We're going to go ahead and do combat first, get in for 2 damage against our opponent. And honestly, I just want to go ahead and get the Meteorite out so that next turn we can play the Gold Forge Sentinel if we want to. We can play the Scab, we can play the Guiltleaf, or we can just play Jace and go slow about it. So I'm going to go ahead and cast Meteorite here, just to go ahead and get out our second black mana source and to deal 2 more damage to our opponent. So once again, this deck of ours can durdle all day, but sooner or later we actually have to end this game, and it's better to do it now while our opponent really can't respond than to have to do it later when they're actually playing cards against us. We want to do as much damage as fast as we can. We don't want to draw this out to give them a chance to recover. Okay, hey, our opponent played Kithion. So clearly we were not the only person in the room today to pull a Planeswalker. How nice. Okay, well, unfortunately for him, I don't want that to have a chance to go off, and I don't want him to get enough mana to make it indestructible. So Guiltleaf Winnower is going to go ahead and come out here, and we're going to destroy Kithion, Hero of Akros. We are waiting for our opponent to respond. And this gives us the ability to target a creature. So Kithion, Hero of Akros is destroyed. Shadows of the Past lets us scry 1. There's another island on top that, frankly, I don't think we need. We're going to go ahead and scry it to the bottom. We're also going to go ahead and do combat. We're going to attack with the Eyeblight Assassin. Our opponent once again is unable to prevent the damage, so they take 2 damage, and we're going to pass the turn back to them. Guiltleaf Winnower will also be effectively unblockable next turn unless our opponent is able to get out a second creature because of his menace, but it appears our opponent probably didn't hit their land again, and they have gone ahead and responded with a concession. So, that was game number 1. Let's go to game number 2. So, this one's going to be kind of hard to sideboard against, as we really haven't seen what our opponent can do, as we only saw, one card out of them? Kithion, I believe? Did we see anything else? So, since we didn't see much, we're going to have a hard time playing on what to do. But like we saw in game 1, we're probably going to want to bring in the Maritime Guard. Let's lower our mana curve a little bit to make it easier to cast our more powerful creatures. So we'll go ahead and pull that out, and we'll also lose one of our Drakes. We'll go ahead and make that adjustment that we made back in round 1, because it did buy us at least a little time that game when we got it out. Didn't do enough, but it did what it was supposed to do. So let's go ahead and try game number 2. Once again, our opponent needs to decide whether or not they're going to play first. They, of course, are, and we get to look at our hand now. It's the dreaded 2-land hand with a couple 3-drops and 1 2-drop that costs 2 blue sources to play. Our opponent also kept 7 cards. So, the question is, do we, assuming we're going to get a land in our first 3 draws. And one of our 3-drops here literally can't block. I'm going to throw it back. So we get a 2-lander here that only has one of our colors. It has shadows, but it does have a turn 3 play if we can get to it. So we're going to keep. We don't want to have to mulligan to 5 if we can help it. There's our opponent with the cheeky foil forest we saw going around earlier. And there we get a Shambling Ghoul, which we can drop on turn 2. So this hand just totally started to pay off for us. The Shambling Ghoul enters tapped, meaning it effectively can't block its first turn. And wait a second, wasn't our opponent in red-white before? So I guess he's playing 3 colors, or maybe one of those colors is the splash? Well, you can officially color me confused at this point. Maybe the opponent's trying 3 colors. I don't think this is really a 3-color format, but, hey, whatever floats your boat. We'll go ahead and play our Shambling Ghoul, which enters the battlefield tapped, and we'll end our turn. So the Majoring Bully has to attack each turn, which is good news for us, but it has prowess, meaning if he has an instant or sorcery spell that any non-creature spell he plays will give his creature +1/+1 till end of turn. Meaning our Shambling Ghoul may not be as good a blocker as we would like to believe. And since our opponent has to attack here, he is, with his Majoring Bully, doing 2 damage to us. And let's see if he does anything during his second main phase. He does. He runs out the Orchard Spirits, which, as we discussed during the draft portion, is kind of like a flying creature, but isn't. So it can be really tricky to deal with. Let's see what we draw this turn. Our opponent seems to have an upkeep stop on us for some reason, maybe for any instance or sorceries, or just instance, he wants to cast in the future. Or maybe he's got something he wants to do now. Well, it's his time to waste. We're hoping to draw a 3rd land this turn, but if not, we can at least play Shadows of the Past. Not a play I'm terribly enthusiastic about, but it's a play. Hopefully our source is blue. We can keep up Disperse, which means next turn, we get our 3rd land, so at the end of the day, that I think is more important. We're going to go ahead and play our Deathbridge Shaman, and we're going to yield to end turn. We're not going to attack with anybody. His 2/2, the green 2/2, the Orchard Spirit, there's nothing we can do about that, unfortunately. It's just going to hit us this turn. The Majoring Bully, on the other hand, I'm going to block with the Deadbridge Shaman, so that even if he does have get at least 1 prowess trigger off, we'll still trade. Unless that prowess trigger buffs the Majoring Bully, like a Titan Strength or something. Let's see what our opponent does. Let's see how they play it. Maybe we just take it this turn. Okay, Fire Fiend Elemental comes out. It's a haste with 3/2 and Renown 1. So that's his declare attacker step, and he's completely tapped out. Meaning if we block here and here, we kill both his creatures, he has to discard a card, and we get to keep our Shambling. So I'm going to be honest, guys. I have no idea why our opponent attacked with the haste creature there. I'm genuinely confused. We're going to go ahead and run out Shadows of the Past here while keeping up Disperse mana. And since our Shambling Ghoul can't block his Orchard Spirit next turn anyway, we're just going to go ahead and attack, get in for 2. And we're going to send our turn back. So if our opponent plays anything big next turn, we can always just disperse it. We're going to go ahead and let Orchard Spirit attack here. We're not going to return it. 2 damage isn't worth dealing with. And in the second main phase, our opponent plays a second copy of Orchard Spirit because we weren't having enough trouble with the first one. Hopefully we'll draw a land here. We do, which means our opponent has a Meteorite coming their way. We're going to go ahead and use Meteorite. We're going to go ahead and kill one of the Orchard Spirits, which also gives us a Scry trigger off Shadows of the Past. And on top, we find a Tower Geist. We're going to leave it there. That seems like a pretty good draw for us. And finally, once again, we're going to go to the combat step because our opponent's creature is tapped, and since we can't block it next turn, we're going to keep our creature up. Our opponent does have hasty creatures, which is something we need to be aware of, but I'm not sure it's something at this point we need to be terribly concerned about. I mean, if he has them, he has them. But we can't really play around a threat that isn't necessarily there. So our opponent plays Pyromancer's Goggles, which he can tap to add red to his mana pool, and when that mana is spent for a red instant or sorcery, copy it and choose new targets for the copy. Well, that's going to be interesting. Let's see what happens here. So our opponent's attacking us for 2. So we draw the Tower Geist here, and even though his ability is really good, I'm going to go ahead and run out the Goldforged Sentinel here, which will allow us to start blocking his Orchard Spirit, since the Goldforged Sentinel does have flying. And we're going to attack for 2 more with our Ghoul. Our opponent only has 2 cards in their hand, and while if they have a powerful red spell, Pyromancer's Goggles is going to put us in a world of hurt. We're just going to have to take our chances with this, I believe. Because what have we... I'm not sure we've seen any of the actual targets from him. I mean, if all else fails, it does ramp him into an extra red mana, kind of like the way what our Meteorite's doing for us. So maybe that's what he's going for, and he's just trying to ramp out big green creatures, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, let's see what he does this turn. So he plays another land, meaning he now has access to 7 mana. But he only has 1 card left in his hand, so it better be something really good for him. Doesn't seem to be, or at least it's not something he's doing anything with right now. We play an island, giving us access to 7 mana. And we're going to go ahead and declare combat with both of our creatures. If our opponent blocks us, great. If he doesn't, also fine. He doesn't. We put him to 8 life. And in our second main phase, we're going to go ahead and play Tower Geist, which, when it enters the battlefield, we look at the top 2 cards of our library. We put one into our hand and the other into our graveyard. Well, Cruel Revival just seems like the better play here, so we can just straight up kill anything that we don't want to deal with. And Separatist Void Mage, while good, is going to go to the yard. And since we now have another flying creature that can block his Orchard Spirit, we seem to be in pretty good shape for being able to block next turn, and we'll pass back. So even if he attacks and then pumps, we can always just return it to his hand with Disperse, which could be a complete and total blowout. We can always just block with Tower Geist, which will put 3 creatures into our graveyard, almost putting us into Shadows of the Past range, where we can just start burning him to death with that ability. Okay, so what is it with people playing Planeswalkers? How many did we open in this thing? Because this guy's played both Kithion and Nissa? That's insane. Also, Nissa is about to flip. And I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. So if I return that to his hand, he'll have the mana to just cast it again. And then he'll just get another... No, oh darn it. Okay, here, what do I do here? Okay, so our opponent Nissa's ability is on the stack. So we say, okay. Oh, that was Nissa's flip ability. Okay, I misunderstood. Well, and I think our opponent's play here is probably just to put the blue creature onto the battlefield in order to protect Nissa. Okay, so at the end step, we're just going to go ahead and disperse the token, which means it doesn't return to their hand. When tokens leave the field, they just disappear. So that's gone. We're going to go ahead, and even though our opponent has Nissa, and that's a threat and everything, we're actually just going to go ahead and end the game. We're going to use Cruel Revival to destroy Orchard Spirit, which gives us a scry off of Shadows of the Past. Scab Goliath we're going to put on top. That seems fine. And even though our opponent has Nissa, we have 8 damage, our opponent has 8 life, and he knows it, so once again, we have the concession. So that was round 2, everybody. We 2-0'd our opponent. Great improvement over round 1. And my condolences to our opponent, but at the same time, he also drafted both a Kithion and a Nissa, so I'm sure he'll still sleep perfectly well tonight. Alright guys, we're 1-1 going into round number 3. I'll start recording again once that begins. We might be waiting a while. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you're enjoying the night so far. I know I am. And here we go. I'll look forward to round 3.